During what started as a light-hearted segment on live TV, Stephen Colbert mocked Ibrahim Traoré. But what happened next left the entire audience speechless. Traoré's calm yet sharp response completely flipped the script and effectively ended the show in a way no one expected. Watch this unforgettable moment of wit, composure, and power. It was a cool Monday evening in New York City. The studio lights of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert gleamed as the audience roared with laughter. Stephen had just welcomed his guest, Ibrahim Traoré, the young president of the transition of Burkina Faso, onto the stage. Everyone expected light jokes and easy banter, but Stephen, known for his sharp tongue, opened the segment with a series of jabs about Africa's boy president and called Burkina Faso that place no one can point to on a map. The audience laughed nervously. The camera cut to Ibrahim's face, calm, almost calm. He sat perfectly still in his crisp suit, his eyes steady, his hands folded. The laughter faded as people began to sense something wasn't right. Then Stephen leaned forward and said with a smirk, "So tell me, Mr. President, what's it like running a country most people don't even care about?" For a long, tense second, the studio was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Ibrahim slowly turned his head, looked Stephen straight in the eye, and smiled faintly. A smile that somehow sent chills through everyone watching. The script had just shifted. Still smiling, Ibrahim leaned toward the microphone and spoke. His voice was soft, yet it carried through the entire room. "Stephen, thank you for having me, but I think you forgot something important tonight. It's not your map we live on, it's our home. And while people here may laugh at my country, children there are digging through dust just to find clean water. Mothers are bearing sons who never had the chance to grow up. And yet we still wake up every day with dignity, with hope. Can your jokes take that away from us?" The air turned heavy. Even Stephen's face stiffened. This wasn't the punchline he had planned. Ibrahim's calm stare never wavered. His words, delivered without anger or malice, struck everyone like a blow. To the chest, a woman in the front row wiped her eyes. "So, Stephen," Ibrahim added gently, "tell me, what's it like making people laugh while others are crying?" The camera zoomed in on Stephen, who had no response. His smile faltered. The audience sat in stunned silence, realizing they'd just witnessed something extraordinary. For the first time that night, it wasn't Stephen Colbert who owned the room. It was Ibrahim Traoré. The silence stretched on until someone in the back of the audience began to clap, then another, and another, and another. Within seconds, the entire studio erupted in applause, loud, thunderous, emotional. Stephen looked visibly shaken. He fumbled his cue cards, glancing nervously at the cameras. But Ibrahim just sat there, his posture still graceful, his eyes shining with quiet strength. He didn't gloat, he didn't smirk. He simply waited for the applause to die down, then said, "I didn't come here to be mocked. I came here to remind people that humanity is bigger than ratings." Stephen swallowed hard. For once, the king of late-night comedy seemed small, and everyone watching at home could feel it. That night, the clip went viral. People all over the world were sharing it with the hashtag #DignityOverLaughter. And yet, no one could have guessed what Ibrahim would do next. The week was only just beginning. When the cameras cut to commercial, Stephen Colbert sat frozen at his desk, his hands shaking slightly as he shuffled his cards. The audience, still reeling from Ibrahim's words, whispered among themselves. Some were crying quietly, others just stared at the young president in awe. Ibrahim remained calm, his hands folded on the desk. He leaned slightly toward Stephen and said softly, "Off, Mike. You don't have to understand us to respect us." Stephen couldn't look him in the eye. Backstage, the producers scrambled to figure out what to do next. Social media was already exploding with hashtags like #BarRespect, Burkina, and Traoré Speaks Truth. The segment had just gone from comedy to something far more powerful, and no one knew how to recover. Ibrahim stood up, straightened his jacket, and extended his hand to Stephen. The host reluctantly shook it, visibly humbled. When the cameras came back on, the audience was standing, clapping through tears. The night had changed, and as Ibrahim exited the stage, he left behind a silence so heavy it seemed to swallow the laughter forever. The world was starting to pay attention. The next morning, Ibrahim woke in his hotel room to find an envelope slipped under his door. The handwriting on the front was shaky, almost childlike. It was a letter. "Dear President Traoré," it began. "I'm just a little boy from Ouagadougou. My name is Samir. My father died last year, but last night I saw you on TV, and for the first time in my life I felt proud. Thank you for showing the world who we really are. Please don't stop fighting for us." Ibrahim's hands trembled as he read it over and over. A tear rolled down his cheek. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his breast pocket. Then he called his aide and said, "Clear my schedule this afternoon. I need to visit someone." His aide looked confused. Sir Ibrahim's voice was quiet but firm. "The people who don't have a voice." That day, he skipped meetings with diplomats and cameras and walked straight into the heart of Haarlem, where a small group of Burkina immigrants were waiting for him. The community center in Haarlem was small and worn down, but it was alive with energy when Ibrahim arrived. Word had spread that the president of Burkina Faso himself was coming to meet them, not to talk politics, but to listen. One by one, they shared their stories. A mother who worked 2 jobs just to send money back home, a young man who dreamed of returning to build schools in his village, a little girl who clung to her father's leg, staring at Ibrahim with wide eyes. As each person spoke, Ibrahim didn't interrupt. He simply nodded, his face full of quiet sorrow and determination. At the end, a grandmother stood up, her voice breaking as she said, "You reminded the world last night that we are human. Thank you, my son." The room was full of tears. Even Ibrahim's own eyes glistened as he embraced her gently. That night, cameras caught him walking back to his hotel alone under the streetlights. His coat collar turned up, the little boy's letter still close to his heart. What he didn't know was that back at the studio, Stephen Colbert had just made a decision that would shock everyone the next night. Tuesday night, the world tuned in to The Late Show again. Everyone expected Stephen Colbert to brush off last night's tension with a joke, as he always did. But as the lights went up, Stephen walked on stage, slower than usual. His face looked different, more serious, almost troubled. The opening monologue was short. No jokes about Africa. No jokes at all. Instead, he stared into the camera and said, "I owe someone and all of you an apology. Last night, I made light of things I don't truly understand. And President Ibrahim Traoré reminded me and everyone here what dignity looks like. I hope you'll forgive me, and more importantly, I hope he will too." The audience applauded softly, but the internet was already ablaze. Clips of Ibrahim's response the night before had now reached over 80 million views. People all over the world were crying as they watched him speak truth with grace. Ibrahim, watching from his hotel room, just sat quietly. He didn't smile. He simply whispered to himself, "It's not about me. It's about them finally seeing us." But his week in America was far from over. Later that night, Ibrahim's phone rang. It was a private number. "President Traoré," said a gentle voice, "this is Emily Carter. I run the New York Children's Cancer Foundation. We saw you on TV. There's a young boy here from Burkina Faso. His name is Madou. He's not doing well, but after seeing you, he asked if he could meet you." Before her voice cracked, Ibrahim didn't hesitate. "Where are you? I'll come tonight." Within an hour, he was at the small, brightly lit hospital wing. Emily led him quietly to Madou's room. The boy was frail, his skin pale against the white sheets, but his eyes lit up the moment he saw Ibrahim. "Mr. President," he whispered weakly. Ibrahim knelt by his bed and took his hand. "Yes, Madou, I'm here." The boy smiled faintly and closed his eyes as tears streamed down his cheeks. In that moment, everyone in the room, doctors, nurses, even Emily, began to cry. And Ibrahim stayed by Mamadou's side the whole night, holding his tiny hand until dawn. The next morning, Ibrahim emerged from the hospital. He looked exhausted, but more determined than ever. His aide tried to tell him he was late for a meeting with ambassadors, but he raised his hand. "Cancel it," he said firmly. "The boy asked me for something, and I intend to keep my promise." The aide swallowed nervously. "What promise, sir?" Ibrahim looked him straight in the eye, his voice steady. "He asked me to tell his story to the world and to make sure no child in Burkina Faso ever has to suffer alone like he did." His words were quiet, but they carried the weight of 1,000 lives. Back at the studio, Stephen Colbert's producers called again. begging Ibrahim to come back for a special segment. But this time, he had a condition. "I'll come back, but only if we talk about the children who are fighting to live and the people who fight for them every day." The producers reluctantly agreed. Little did they know, the second appearance would break hearts around the globe and forever change the way people saw him. Wednesday night came and the studio was packed. This time, the mood was different, heavier, more serious. The same audience that laughed at his expense 2 nights earlier now sat in hushed anticipation waiting for Ibrahim's second appearance. Stephen Colbert stood at his desk, visibly nervous. When he finally announced Ibrahim, the applause was thunderous, but also emotional, with people standing, many already wiping tears before he even spoke. Ibrahim walked out, his expression calm but somber. He didn't wave or smile this time. He carried something in his hand, a photograph of Madou, the sick little boy he'd spent the night with. When Stephen began to speak, Ibrahim gently raised his hand. The audience fell silent. "Before we laugh again," he said softly, "I want to tell you a story. Last night, I met a boy. He asked me to speak for him because he could no longer speak for himself. This is Madou." He held up the photo. "He is one of millions, and we cannot keep laughing while they are crying." The studio was so quiet you could hear people sniffing through tears, and he hadn't even started his story yet. Ibrahim sat on the guest chair, his eyes locked on Stephen's, though his words were for everyone watching. "I know this show is meant to be funny," he began gently, "but there is nothing funny about what children like Madou go through every day. He told me he dreamed of becoming a teacher, but yesterday he died before his dream could come true." The audience gasped. Even Stephen covered his mouth in shock. Ibrahim paused to compose himself. His hands trembled slightly as he added, "He asked me one thing before he closed his eyes, to tell his story to the world. So here I am, not as a president tonight, but as a man." You could hear people in the audience openly sobbing now. Stephen's own eyes glistened. Ibrahim placed the photograph on the desk and looked directly into the camera. "I will not let his memory be forgotten, and I will not stop fighting for children like him until the whole world sees their worth." The audience rose to their feet, clapping through tears. But the most powerful moment was still to come. As the applause died down, Ibrahim stood and faced the audience one last time. "I don't need to stay here any longer," he said quietly. "You've heard what you needed to hear. What you do with that is up to you now." There was no anger in his voice, only an unshakable dignity. Stephen tried to stop him, stammering, "Please stay, what we can." But Ibrahim simply shook his hand, leaned down to whisper something only Stephen could hear, and then walked off the stage. The cameras followed him as he exited the studio, coat draped over his arm, his silhouette framed by the harsh New York lights outside. The audience was on their feet again, crying, clapping, whispering his name as if they were watching history unfold. That night, clips of his walkout flooded social media. Millions of people cried watching the quiet power of a man who chose humanity over fame. And Ibrahim, he simply returned to his hotel room, sat by the window, and watched the city lights, holding Madou's photo close to his heart. By Thursday morning, Ibrahim's name was on every major news outlet. Headlines read, "The President Who Made America Cry," and "The Walkout Heard Around the World." Ibrahim was scheduled to leave New York that evening, but as he arrived at JFK Airport, something unexpected awaited him. Hundreds of people, Americans, Burkina Bay immigrants, activists, stood gathered near the terminal, holding up signs. "Thank you, Ibrahim, for Madou. You made us care." As he stepped out of the car, the crowd began clapping and chanting his name. Many of them were crying. Mothers held their children up so they could see him. One elderly man even dropped to his knees in gratitude. Ibrahim stood there, visibly moved, and walked slowly through the crowd, shaking hands, hugging strangers, listening to their words. A young woman handed him a note. It read simply, "Because of you, I called my mother in Ouagadougou tonight. Thank you for reminding me who I am." His plane was ready to board, but the story of his visit to America was far from over. Just as Ibrahim was about to board his flight, an aide hurried toward him, holding another envelope. "Sir," the aide said softly, "this just arrived at the embassy." Ibrahim took it, opening it slowly. Inside was a simple, handwritten note from Stephen Colbert. "Dear President Trump, I've spent every hour since you left my stage thinking about what you said. I was wrong. I mocked what I didn't understand. Last night, I went home and cried. My son asked me why. I told him because a man from Burkina Faso taught me how to be a better father. I'll never forget what you did for me, or for all of us. I hope someday I can make it right. Signed, Stephen Colbert. Ibrahim closed the note and looked out at the crowd one last time. His chest felt heavy with emotion, but his eyes stayed clear. We are never too big to learn, he murmured to himself, and with that he boarded the plane. When Ibrahim's plane touched down in Ouagadougou early Friday morning, it was still dark. But waiting for him on the tarmac was a group of young children holding candles, standing silently. Word of his speech and Madou's story had reached home. As Ibrahim stepped off the plane, the children began singing softly. It was an old Burkina lullaby about hope and dignity. He stopped, kneeling to meet them eye to eye. Many of the children had tears running down their cheeks, but they still smiled at him. One little girl stepped forward, holding up her tiny hands. In them was a small folded piece of paper. This is from Madou's mother, she whispered. Ibrahim took it gently, unfolding it to read. He died with your name on his lips. You made his last night happy. May God bless you forever. Ibrahim pressed the note to his heart. His eyes finally filled with tears, and he whispered back to her, and I will carry his name on mine forever. That night, the whole nation cried with him. Saturday morning in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim sat alone in his office. Looking out at the sunrise, the whole week felt like a blur. The mocking on live TV, Mamadou's last smile, the quiet walkout, the candle lit, welcome back home. As he held Madou's mother's note in his hand, his phone buzzed. Unknown number, he answered quietly. President Traoré, came a familiar voice. It's Stephen Colbert. There was silence for a moment. Then Stephen said, his voice cracking. I didn't want it to end like that. I want to do something real this time. For the children, for Madou. Please come back. Let me use my stage for them. Ibrahim closed his eyes. He thought of Madou, of the children waiting for water and school books. All right, Stephen, he said calmly. But this time, you speak last, and you speak from the heart. And with that, Ibrahim boarded the first flight back to New York. The world held its breath. Sunday evening, the lights of the late show blazed once more. But the mood was different now. No laughter, just quiet anticipation. Stephen walked out, his eyes red, his usual smile replaced by a solemn expression. Ladies and gentlemen, he began softly, I once made a mistake here. I mocked a man who showed me who I really am. Tonight, I give my stage back to him to honor a boy named Madou. And all the children we forgot. The crowd erupted in applause as Ibrahim walked out. This time, the audience stood for him. Even before he spoke, he held up Madou's photo. This, he said, is why I came back. Not for me, not for Stephen, but because this boy deserved more than jokes, and so do the millions like him. Tears streamed down faces in the crowd. Some even sobbed openly. Ibrahim's voice never wavered as he promised. Every dollar raised tonight will build schools and hospitals back home. Every life saved will be for him. The audience erupted in applause and tears. By Monday morning, donations for Burkina Faso's children had surpassed $10 million. News outlets called it the Mamadou miracle. People around the world posted their own stories of hardship and hope under the hashtag #OnForMamadou in his hotel room. Ibrahim watched the news quietly, his heart full yet heavy. He thought of Madou, of the children's candles at the airport, of Stephen's tearful apology. For once, he allowed himself to cry. Later that evening, he returned to the studio one last time. Not for cameras, not for interviews, just to stand on the now empty stage. He whispered into the silence, Thank you, Madou. You changed the world. Then he walked out, coat over his shoulder, into the New York night, and the world would never forget him. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, if you cried for Mamadou and stood in awe of Ibrahim Traoré's strength, then please subscribe to this channel to hear more stories of hope and courage. Like this video if you believe the world needs more people like Ibrahim. And most importantly, comment below. I stand with Ibrahim. I stand with Madou. Your words can inspire others. Your voice can change lives. Let's make the world feel again. Tell me in the comments what part of this story broke your heart the most. Thank you for watching.